I'm Desiree Duvernay, and here's a little video about our course on epigenetics and DNA from International Medical University. We have to understand that life is not all chemistry and life is not all DNA. The chemical companies want us to think everything is chemistry, but it's just not true. We have to understand a lot more about DNA, and it's not just the chemistry. But here we have the ideas from CSI, Crime Scene International, Crime Scene Investigations, that tells us that DNA evidence, you see, it's the biological evidence of who and what we are, the DNA molecule, and it's in every body the same. But there's something on top of it called epigenetics.
So say you have a clone or a secret identical twin, because you know that a twin or a clone is a genetically identical person to you, which is crazy, but it's true. Anyway, so you have this clone or your twin or what have you, and your parents decide that it's too much trouble to keep both of you. And so they give your clone to a kind of sketchy traveling circus. Now I know your parents probably wouldn't actually do this, but just roll with me for a minute. So for the purposes of this example, let's just say that you grew up living a normal suburban American life, while your clone grew up with less stability and less access to nutritious food and less education, but more exercise and more access to sword swallowers and bearded ladies. And let's say you guys are 50 years old or whatever, you get together and have some lunch. So you're sitting there across the table from your clone. What do you think you see? Well, for starters, clone probably has a tattoo on its face. And if clone had stayed in the circus, clone probably, professionally rides a unicycle over a tightrope, so clone is probably in pretty good shape. But then again, clone probably smokes cigarettes and probably was malnourished as a child, so might be slightly shorter than you. By the same token, let's say that you've been eating Sonic tater tots 5 days a week since 1992, so you're looking a little bit tubby. Plus, you spent the last 20 years at a really stressful job that puts you at risk for all kinds of weird health complications. So, at 50, you and clone would probably look pretty different from one another. But it turns out, you don't just look different, you actually have become different. Now, if some scientists looked at your genetic code, they would say that your DNA was still exactly the same as that other person. That is to say, if your genome is a paragraph, all of the letters would be in the exact same order. But on another level, there would be a huge difference, and if we extend this metaphor, we can say that the letters are in the same order, but the spaces and the punctuation are all in different places. Of course, completely, potentially changing the message of that paragraph.
Let's eat, Grandpa. Let's eat, Grandpa. Correct punctuation can save a person's life. We have to understand this. Private, no visitors allowed. Private, no visitors allowed. See, there's a value in punctuation. I don't think I'm funny. Or, I don't think I am funny. Just what we have to understand about this punctuation, and this is what epigenetics are. You see, twins have exactly the same DNA, but they all have radically different fingerprints. It's not all the same. We have to understand that there's something different here. Here's two identical twins. They have the same DNA, but they don't seem to have the same type of dietary concerns. Here's two twins, one a smoker, one a non-smoker. So you can see there's a problem here. We have to understand that identical twins with the same DNA, but different lifestyle that produces different people. We have to look at the fact that it's not just the chemical of the DNA. There's other factors beyond just the chemistry. Here we have two identical twins, same DNA, but yet a different sex. It's incredible. Here we have another group, two identical twins, but one wants to be transgender and the other one doesn't feel that way at all. And then when we get down to this picture here, we have two identical twins, exactly the same DNA, but the genetic disease that they both have is only active in one of them.
The study of this genetic punctuation that I'm talking about is called epigenetics, which literally means above genetics. The epigenome doesn't change your DNA, but it decides how much or whether some genes are expressed in different cells in your body. Epigenetics looks at what happens to your genes over the course of your life and whether those changes could be passed down to your children or even your grandchildren.
Yes, this epigenetics doesn't just affect you, it actually affects the generations past you, your children and your children's children. As we could see more and more about this. That smoking, a woman who smokes while pregnant, that affects 3 generations down the line, not just hers. So we have to understand smoking, nutrition, diet, toxicity, and even emotions. There's an awful lot of things that can be affecting our epigenetic type of happening. Our grandparents here, how they exercise, what chemicals, toxicity, all affects who and what they are and who what you are.
Well, here's the way epigenetics works. You have billions of cells in your body, and they each contain your DNA, the same exact blueprint of your genetic code. But just because they have the DNA doesn't mean that they know what to do with it. They need outside instruction from these little carbon and hydrogen compounds called methyl groups. The way these methyl groups control the genome is by binding to a gene and saying, do not express this gene. The methyl groups bind differently to your genome in a skin cell versus, say, a tongue cell or an eyeball cell. And that is one of the ways that a cell knows that, hey, I'm a skin cell, or hey, I'm an eyeball cell, or hey, I'm a muscle cell. In addition to methyl groups, epigenetics is also controlled by histones, which are proteins that are basically the spools that DNA winds itself around. Histones can change how tightly or loosely the DNA is wound around them. If they're more loosely wound, the genes can express more, and if they're more tightly wound, then they express less. So whereas the methyl groups are more like a switch, the histones are more like a knob. Every cell in your body has a distinct methylation and histone pattern. And that is what gives every cell its marching orders. Think of your genome, the DNA, as the actual hardware of the computer, while the epigenome is more like the software, which tells the hardware what to do. The genome is what's going to be doing all the work, but the epigenome is going to be telling it what to do. So the hardware of your DNA is going to be the same throughout your entire life. But these epigenetic tags do change throughout your life, and they decide what genes get expressed or not. Now, epigenetic information in a cell isn't permanent. It can change throughout your life, and it can be hereditary. And it can change over time, especially when your body is going through a lot of changes, like, say, during puberty. A bunch of methyl groups kick in and they're like, okay, so you guys over here, you're gonna have to start growing hair, and you guys over here, I really need you guys to get behind giving this guy some really horrible acne. Or like when you get pregnant, which hopefully I won't, but when you do, your epigenome has to be like, all right, guys, everything's about to get a whole lot bigger in here, and we're gonna have to pass something the size of like a Merriam-Webster's dictionary through that little pipe over there, so let's get this thing done.
Yes, our lifestyle affects us, and identical twins can have a completely different type of life, as one lucky Lyle or troubled Tim.
But it's not just these dramatic times when the epigenome is changing. It changes subtly throughout our entire lives. And it changes based on a lot of environmental factors, like what we do, what we eat, what we smoke, and how stressed out we are on a daily basis. Scientists have found that things like a bad diet can actually lead to methyl groups binding to the wrong place and making mistakes. And with those bad instructions, cells become abnormal and become a disease. And then basically all hell breaks loose and you get cancer or something.
We are what we eat. We cannot ignore our nutrition and our diet. This really does cause problems, not just for us, but for our generations in the future.
Epigenetics is a very young science, though we've known about the epigenome since the 1970s.
I first wrote a whole chapter on the epigenetic performance in DNA in the Promorpheus, which was published in the Library of Congress in 1982, establishing a treatise on quantum biology.
It's only in the last 20 years that we've even known what effect these epigenetic tags are having on our DNA. And even after they got all that business straight, scientists still thought that all of our epigenetic tags were stripped off of our genome before they were passed on to our children. So if you started smoking 10 packs a day when you were 10 years old, that would certainly be a horrible health decision for you, but you wouldn't necessarily be harming your unborn children in any measurable way. However, the thinking on that is changing pretty rapidly. Because it's true that a lot, even most of the epigenetic information from a parent is stripped off of the embryo's genome in the first few days, and fresh ones are created specifically for this new person. However, some of these tags get stuck on the genome and are passed down from generation to generation. And it just so happens that the more they study this, the more it looks like bad epigenetic information is being passed from generation to generation. And this is a whole new way to think about how we pass information between generations. Your grandmother was making dietary decisions that affect you today.
The Lifestyle Inventory, Suppression, Obstruction to Cure Index, Behavioral Medicine. This is medicine. It is very important for us to know this, not just in our lives, but also for our children and our children's children's children.
As we experience all of these new strange epidemics, diabetes, autoimmune disorders, cancers, that weren't appearing in previous generations, it's starting to look like these may be caused by epigenetic information passed down from our parents. I know! It's such an unbelievable buzzkill! There is no point in our lives when we can do anything without guilt anymore.
So yes, a good lifestyle, suppression, obstruction to cure, the index, behavioral medicine, these are all real medicine, and that they can be linked to different miasms as well as the strong emotions, guilt, shame, fear. These other things can create epigenetic inheritable diseases. The law of susceptibility tells us that a negative mind can attract these, and these can be transmitted to the next generation. And as we look into the different miasms, we see shame, fear, guilt, not just related, but actually causative to different miasms. So we have to be able to look at this. And we see that these different miasms produce different biological events. They actually produce a different type of biology, reactivity, immunity. And now that we've looked at this and seeing how epigenetic past can lock genes to prevent genetic expression, well, what can we do to cure it? Well, we're going to find that meditation, music, especially forgiveness meditation, that this has a real strong ability to undo the genetic or epigenetic damages. And as we study this, we can see that I have developed an entire science. And now I'm going to play you a sample of a chromosome music to help repair epigenetic disturbance. In our course on epigenetics and DNA, we go into a much thorough, deep understanding of this. So I welcome you now. I hope that I've introduced a little bit of an idea that proves the fact that the DNA is not all, and that lifestyle is a very, very important part of medicine.